What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
Packaging design should seduce, inform, and even save the planet. I'm BRANDERMAN, and this is BRANDERMAN, the podcast where I talk with experts to uncover what it actually takes to make a positive impact on consumers, the market, and society. Warning: keep this podcast out of the reach of close-minded marketers and designers. Before the interview, let me introduce my design agency.
Brands with purpose. Human, agile, honest brands that leave no one indifferent. Tridimage creates and revitalizes brands to imagine and shape the future. Tridimage, the branding and packaging design agency for bold brands.
Today I had the privilege to speak with Peter Oberdorfer, a 25 years veteran in digital entertainment and CGI. Currently president of Tactic, an immersive creative and production studio based in San Francisco. Its team of engineers and designers specialize in experiences centered around virtual and augmented reality. Tactic has produced renowned apps such as the 19 Crimes series, The Walking Dead, and recently Jack Daniel's AR experience. In this episode, Peter teaches us how to tell effective stories in augmented reality and how to gain real user retention with packaging experiences. He also explains why AR has the potential to push the boundaries of storytelling and brand interaction. Peter has co-founded several well-regarded digital post-production firms, including the interactive firm Float Hybrid Entertainment, the Academy Award and Emmy Award-winning visual effects studio Giant Killer Robots, as well as Hollywood's original previsualization firm Pixel Liberation Front. Today, with me, Peter Oberdorfer. Pete, each of us is a container of ideas, projects, and dreams. However, we can't read the label when we are inside the jar. What do you think your label says, or what would you like it to say?
That's a tough one. I guess just following my path and my tenure, I've had several different paths that I've followed, and they've all kind of led to where I am now in a strange way. So I think it's a variety pack, if I was going to sort of say some sort of product that has multiple flavors, but hopefully has a pleasing taste to most. I'm like a pack of lifesavers, you know. Hopefully somebody likes the red one or the orange one or whatever, because that'll keep me in business.
At least it will be refreshing, that's for sure.
Right. So anyway, yeah, that's about the best I can do with that answer, but I think that's probably appropriate.
Perfect. Having studied architecture, how did your passion for immersive tech and digital entertainment begin?
Well, I always had an interest in the built environment and the world around me and the idea of world building, more than storytelling, world building. I think architecture was the closest to that back when I went to school. So I did that and I was so into it. I knew I was going to be the world's next big architect and all of this. And then it only took about a year after undergraduate to realize this is not the thing I really wanted to do. Once I was actually thrown into an architecture office and saw sort of the hierarchies that were there and how it was kind of a gray industry in many ways. I loved the theoretical and the sort of design side of it. For me, I just didn't have the patience at the time. And in graduate school, I was lucky enough to pick a program that was very interested in technology. And at that point, everything we did was ink and pencil on paper. And we got what I think was several $1 million worth of silicon graphics machines in the studio. And my buddy and I were the student teachers of that because even the professors didn't know how to operate the software at the time. And so I would learn something and then teach it the next couple of weeks, but it ended up working out. You know, when you get into something new, the great thing about it is no one knows how to do it. And at the time in 1993, this stuff was all pretty new. So we were learning the software that was used in Jurassic Park and other things like that, but we were using it to visualize architecture and spaces. My friends and I would stay up all night just learning how to use this software well and trying to figure out ways that we could bend it and break it to our interests. And I got recruited to work on a Hollywood production up in the East Coast. They had Doug Trumbull's old facility where Doug Trumbull was the visual effects master who did 2001 and Blade Runner and all these things. They were making a Sylvester Stallone movie called Judge Dredd. They needed people who knew this 3D visualization, but they also needed people who knew architecture because they wanted people to design buildings and cities of the future. We all made a little group called a previsualization group up in Massachusetts. That became this group that kind of did a lot of early CGI work right when Hollywood was starting to transition into computer graphics and visual effects using computer graphics. And so we made these future cities in the year 2500, and that was just so much fun. I found my path, I'm going to work on movies because there was just so much free flowing design that I could really just get into it. And that was the first pre-visualization department in any movie on any Hollywood project. And then from there, we opened up a company that specialized in pre-visualization called Pixel Liberation Front. And we ended up working on a lot of movies. It was a technical thing, but it also was a cinematography sort of thing where directors realized they could plan every shot of their movie even before they were there on set shooting it. And then from there, I got more and more interested in the design side, though, because that was a little bit technical for me. So I founded another company called Giant Killer Robots.
Great names.
Thank you. Yeah, it's movies, so not super serious, right? So we went up to San Francisco. We grew to just under 100 people, and we worked on over 30 Hollywood films, including the Matrix trilogy and What Dreams May Come, Fountain, Spider-Man 3, Fantastic Four, Happy Feet, a bunch of others. We were lucky enough to have our company nominated for and win an Academy Award for visual effects and an Academy Award for animation, as well as an Emmy for visual effects. And eventually around the mid to late aughts, like 2007, we sort of saw the writing on the wall for visual effects because things were moving more and more offshore. So it wasn't really something that we could compete with in California that well, at least for a sustainable business. And so I ended up getting involved in interactive sort of out of an economic imperative. But what happened was one of my associates on the Matrix movies, John Gaeta, he had a friend of his and mine who was working over at Microsoft and getting involved with something called the Kinect, an early mixed reality device. They wanted to figure out from people outside of the game industry ways that this could be leveraged for kind of fully immersive and cinematic experiences. They tapped John Gaeta and myself to come up with visualizations and ideas of how these things could be used. And we became kind of an idea factory for them. The ground was moving under our feet with technology, and we got pretty quickly involved in early days augmented reality and mixed reality, like virtual reality, during this same time because things were moving so fast. I decided that was the direction that I wanted to go. Having done, in visual effects, having done some commercial work in the past and having a broad network of people who are capable of doing computer graphics and design, I founded Tactic with a friend of mine, Nate Robinson. We just started out with sort of the idea of let's make an agency for mixed reality. Obviously, we had no portfolio and nothing but our past reputations. But little by little, we were able to cobble together a few projects and get some momentum going. Our first augmented reality application for a brand was for Cuervo Tequila. Yeah. And that was, I think, 2014. And that was pretty early days. Like the phones weren't that great back then. And the packaging was beautiful. The idea was, tell a story in a bottle, kind of creating these kind of ship in a bottle kind of illusions that happen within this bottle. that fade up once you look at it. And then we did some sound design and some effects that would allow that to fade up and down. And then you had this mobile app that could kind of emulate these periods of Cuervo's history, from the founding of their distillery through to the invention of the margarita and other things that would appear within the bottle over time. It caught a lot of attention, even though the phones at the time were really on the border of just being able to pull this off. Then 2 or 3 years later, 19 Crimes came around, and they initially had hit us up to do a VR movie, a 360 movie, which was all the rage back then, which sounded fun, but kind of was disassociated from the product and just raised awareness without necessarily having that integrated to an experience that happened on the package. And so I remembered this Cuervo thing we did and showed them an example of that. And I said, I think I could make the people on these labels come to life and start to talk. Now, I didn't know what the story of the brand was as much. So the agency we were working with ended up writing these great background stories, which I think caught people's attention. And then we were able to work with them to come up with these sort of compelling stories that happened right off of the packaging. And then we worked to make it look like it was really on the packaging. So the lighting and the texture of the paper and everything just would begin to move and seamlessly come to life. Sometimes things just catch fire, and it went from 10,000 people picking up these bottles to 100,000 to 1 million to millions and millions. It went from a brand that I think had 400 something thousand cases a year, which is pretty big, a medium-sized brand, to well over 3.5 million within the year based on the AR campaign. 19 Crimes became their hottest selling brand by far, and on the back of this augmented reality campaign. And so they started out with 3 varietals of wine and then quickly expanded that to, 11 or 12 different varietals. Each time a new varietal came out, we would advertise it within the app. And the app initially started out as the 19 Crimes app, but then became Living Wine Labels, which didn't just carry the 19 Crimes brand, but became a platform that carried like 10 different brands. And we would make content for those brands, including other really successful launches like Embrazen, which told the story of all these groundbreaking women through history, and as well as the Walking Dead wine, which had zombies breaking out of the bottles and fighting on the tabletops around the bottle in 3D. So we had all these great creative opportunities to tell these stories and to integrate into the packaging a way to make these stories resonate with the public and a way to make it tied to the products themselves, which I think in a lot of the augmented reality that we've seen become so pervasive in terms of face filters and events that happen in the middle of Central Park or whatever in New York. This was something that was tied to the packaging.
In your packaging projects, virtual content is always connected to reality in a compelling and meaningful way. How can we achieve powerful storytelling that merges the physical package with the virtual one?
Coming from my movie days, you always wanted the effects in the movies to be part of the real world, right? You wanted them to feel like there is a sense of presence and connection to the real world. And it's no different with these types of stories that we're trying to tell on package. So if we do some type of portal into a package or something on the label begins to move or whatever, we wanted all these things to happen as seamlessly as possible and to be part of the real user space and to seem like it wasn't your phone doing these things, but it was the bottle or the box doing these things. So these packages became somehow magical objects that people would collect. What we saw was a correlation between user engagement with the packaging and with these stories that we're trying to sell and with sales. And so it drove sales. It made people remember the product because the experience wasn't disassociated from the packaging. And it also had us draw upon the graphic cues that were on the packaging to help tell our stories. So if there were mugshots of all these 19th century prisoners on the bottle, that became the story point from which we would figure out what kind of narrative we were going to tell. And we saw that bear fruit in terms of how people were sharing these experiences on Facebook, like individual movies of people just going through the wine stores and scanning things would get posted to Facebook. And some of those Facebook movies had over 20 million views themselves. So caused a huge amount of brand awareness because it wasn't disassociated from the physical packaging. People would pick up the package, they would have this experience, they would bond with it, they would take it home, show others, and it's everything you want. One of the metrics that I think is really almost misleading about the way we do this on-package augmented reality is that usually on the web or with digital activations, if you have a YouTube ad or a banner ad or something like that, you get a click, that's considered a success. But the retention of that compared to somebody who actually goes into a retail space and picks up a product and has an experience like that, that is so much more one-to-one with a sale than if somebody's just on their laptop and they see an ad in Facebook. You've actually got the people at the location picking up the product and having a story being told to them while they have the product in their hand. In terms of seduction, it's that much more potent. And I think that's something that we're really trying to understand is what is that relationship from a sales perspective? What are some of the techniques that we can use to tell the most effective stories? I think seamlessness is one of them, to make it really seem like the package and the experience are one. But then there's also brevity. And then there's also the idea of what types of stories are you telling? In our experience, the most successful ones are not, this has vitamins and minerals, but more Snoop Dogg just extemporaneously talking to you about what he wants to talk to you about, or the story of these prisoners and their banishment to Australia. Things like that are entertainment, and they're not necessarily about a 10% off coupon or what ingredients are in the product. I think people want to be entertained. And then once they're entertained, that's a little bit different than normal advertising in that you're kind of giving away this fun piece. But then once people go through that threshold and have fun with it, then they bond it. And then at that point, they're much more likely to see secondary things like, okay, well, where do I buy more of this? Or what is this thing that I'm holding? And they end up wanting to find out more, or maybe navigating to more standard information about the product. And it's the same reason why in packaging, you would just design a beautiful package in the first place. There's this idea of beauty and entertainment and storytelling, and it's all basically just adding beauty to the world, right? And design is part of that.
We are entering a new era of immersive computing, where the barriers between reality and the virtual world will be broken down. Consumers will come to expect all surfaces around them, including packaging, to offer additional layers of digital content. Pete, many listeners are likely to think of augmented reality as a gimmick or a passing fad, while others consider AR as an unlimited digital canvas for brand experiences. Who of them are right?
Well, I think both can be true to a certain extent, in that you can have trends that lead to mediums. Certainly, augmented reality has had an explosion of interest. And because it's technologically driven, these platforms and these media explosion around augmented reality, whether that's be Snap, face filters, or anything else, sure, it's a trend. But things like TikTok and Twitter are a trend to become part of the firmament of the world that are around us. This is really becoming a camera-first society. People put everything on their Instagram, they do TikTok, whatever, and there's all these filters now that are appearing over what you do, which are augmented reality. And so I think as people look out into the world, they're almost going to expect some layer of augmented reality and mixed reality with what they're seeing through their ubiquitous mobile devices that they take everywhere with them. And it's the way they interface with things now, right? So I think the idea of turning packaging into smart objects is just the next step. It just makes sense. So when I look at something, I can just be in a physical space, in a retail space, or at a particular location, and I can look at something and I can have that thing tell me a story. And if it does, then it's a whole nother aspect to how we design the packaging or the products that we see around us in our environment. We don't just think of them as static objects, but we think of them as portals that can tell us not only a story, but a continuing story, which can be evergreen and have episodes or unfold over time or have utility to it besides the entertainment. And I think the next step is going to have that be more and more seamless and integrated into our cameras so that when we just use our native camera on our phone, we'll be able to have these experiences without doing anything other than looking at them. Apple has just announced that they're going to be releasing their headset in the next year or so. Their latest developers conference was all about mixed reality and augmented reality as the basis. So as far as purveyors of technology, companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, they're all in. It's only going to grow, and the sophistication of the audience is only going to grow. The ways that this is leveraged is something that we've just begun to scratch the surface. And yes, it's a trend, but it's a trend that's only going in one direction.
Yeah, if we make the analogy with smartphones, we are in the era of those brick-sized phones.
Yep, I agree. And obviously, it's something that we're big believers and proselytizers about. At this point, I think it's reached a tipping point, and we don't necessarily have to tell people about it. There's a large awareness now that wasn't there even a year and a half ago. I think now there's so many use cases out there of things happening along these lines, whether it be package-based augmented reality or just augmented reality in general, that most people have seen something somewhere that's analogous to this, and there's definitely an appetite for it.
Yeah. Undoubtedly, packaging is an influential factor at the moment of purchase. Packaging is in a way the UI of consumer brands, defining to a large extent the consumer experience. What new superpowers can augmented reality bring to packaging?
The idea that the packaging can speak to you and allow you interactively to participate in what that product or package offers. In a way, the user can open the box without really opening it and find out about what's inside and have either an emotional or an informational experience that lets them explore interactively what it is that they want to know about that product. And, that's pretty revolutionary. But then you also have the idea that it can be a point of constant contact where when they look at that packaging, it can tell them different things over time as well. We can transform that packaging seasonally if there's things that happen over different periods of time. Like for almond bries, we have seasonal recipes, or you might have a Christmas or holiday type of event happen around a package. All of these things now, rather than being separate runs of separate packaging, can all happen off of a unified mark. Something like the Jack Daniel's bottle, which has had its label for 70 years. That label can tell different stories off of that same ubiquitous label that everybody knows that sort of has a permanence to it. Now the label can transform into a multitude of stories, whether it's the story about a tour of the distillery and what happens on the distillery, or the history of Jack Daniel's, or the different ingredients and process that goes into the milling and the distilling of the product. All of that we can tell in different fun and animated and interactive ways. It just unlocks a whole different way of thinking about this stuff so that even when packaging remains the same, it can transform.
What is the biggest mistake you see brands making when creating augmented reality experiences?
There are a few. We generally discourage people from just playing a video, treating it like it's a YouTube, on the side of a package or something like that. We encourage some allowance for the user to be able to choose what pathways they want to take in the experience, whether that be fully gamified or just passively interactive. It's nice to give the user some choice. We see things that aren't very seamless with the package. I think it makes a lot of sense to have this sort of magical quality of the packaging transform from its existing design into the experiential realm as seamlessly as possible so that there's that wow moment. And then I think the idea that a lot of the advertisers we talk to are very familiar with the idea of web ads or broadcast ads having some brevity to it. For some reason, a lot of the brands we talk to initially want to have these 3-minute, 4-minute experiences that trigger off of a package. And we think that's too long. We can tell a longer story, but we break it up into segments so that people can get beginning, middle, end kind of experience in, say, 20 seconds, because they might be at a store shelf or showing a friend or something. And we keep in mind they're holding a phone. Everybody's looking through the phone to see this. And it's the kind of thing you want to be able to look at and then reset and then go back to and maybe have a separate experience after that. So we try to stack up multiple experiences that happen, but keep them each brief. So that's another mistake we see is people lacking brevity in their experience. You have like a 5-minute long thing that's happening and nobody sits through all of that in one session, so we try to keep it brief.
Talking about 19 crimes, what is the worst AR crime you have ever seen or committed?
Well, I'm not going to implicate ourselves, but, I think we do see things that aren't very brief or that expect the user to either download an app and then watch essentially what is just a YouTube video on the side of a package. And there's no real value add there. That's when augmented reality is a gimmick, is when people don't design to the medium. Each medium has its own particular qualities and properties. Brands sometimes will think, oh, we need an augmented reality campaign. And they won't necessarily care about what the experience is. They just will checkbox it like we need one of those. And when they do that, they're just looking for brief novelty. They aren't really embracing the medium for what its potentials might be. And I think that shuts the door a lot of the time on what it could be. And a lot of the time they'll leverage existing assets and existing visuals from other media, shoehorn that into this. And that generally doesn't work. It's not a remarkable experience. And it's not tailor-made to the packaging in that case.
Pete, I am convinced that augmented reality will be a revolution in marketing, branding, communications, and of course, design. Do you think immersive technologies will rewrite the rules of packaging design? Will we be able to differentiate between physical and digital design, or will it one and the same?
I like to think of this as kind of a grand unified theory where a lot of what we're doing, especially as our augmented reality is moving towards web-based platforms like Eighth Wall and social media like Spark AR and Snap Lens Studio, like as those become more and more sophisticated as authoring platforms, and as game engines like Unity and Unreal have components for easily authoring augmented reality experiences, there's all these ways to do it. As all of those become more and more advanced and ubiquitous, we're going to see this unification of things we do on mobile, things we do on social, and things we do on web as being one thing. And so the way we think of the web will be done on a headset device that Apple or Google sells. It's just going to be a filter, and we'll be able to tell the difference. But I think a lot of people will put their glasses on every once in a while just to sort of see the world from this enhanced standpoint. And sometimes they'll want to filter it out and just see the real world. But I think it's not going to be separate from the web or from mobile. It's just going to grow into part of it, and from social as well. It's just going to be an evolution of all of those.
What changes do you think we will see in the coming years in the world of brands from the widespread adoption of augmented reality? How do you envision a shopping experience in the year like 2030?
I think that packaging, even now, that distinguishes itself and is maybe stands out on the store shelf, is going to become ever more important. And that might have been the case even before augmented reality, is brand identity and standing out in a retail space. As retail becomes more and more competitive and difficult to differentiate, even at the point of consumption or at home, if people order these things online and they get it, there's going to be less and less of an opportunity within the store to have out-of-home signage and marketing around the packaging. So I think having the packaging speak to people and offer on-roads onto this digital layer, that's going to be kind of the trend. And so from our standpoint, packaging that already is highly visually driven, that has signature images and things like that, I think lends itself the best to augmented reality.
Speaking of the future, Pete, what's your next adventure?
Oh, we don't look too far ahead, but I do think now that there's a reopening, we had gotten involved in a lot of cross promotions with movies and events like the Olympics and things like that. before everything quickly shut down. And so I'm looking forward to concerts and movies and sporting events and things like that reopening so that we can begin to have projects that cross promote what's happening in the real world. Because I think that always is something fun for people, is to see something from a superhero movie or something, one of their favorite athletes or celebrities happening on the packaging. And now there's a reason for that to happen again now that things might be reopening. So that's my hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know it's not opening the same everywhere, so I'm hoping it does soon.
Pete, this was a great talk. You started by identifying yourself with a lifesaver pill, but I think that you are more like Morpheus in the Matrix, offering us the red pill.
Maybe so. I don't know. Yeah. Let's see. We'll see where things go. Hopefully that was the right pill. Hopefully that was the right choice. Thank you so much, Hernan. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks for all the great questions. And obviously, we hope to see lots of brands pick up on this augmented reality, as we said, trend. But, medium is where I see it going. And hopefully it'll end up going in the directions we anticipate.
I hope you have enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. You can check the episode notes for all the relevant links. I also invite you to follow me on Instagram and on my website, branderman.design. Follow the podcast in your favorite app so you don't miss the next episode of Branderman, the podcast where we try to uncover how to make a positive impact on consumers, the market, and society through package design.